White House is expected to release the president's 2018 budget today as well. Dr. Lee Hanna, assistant professor of political science at Wright State University, is joining me now live in studio. Good morning.
Good morning.
Thanks for joining us again. But before we get to the budget, I do want to piggyback a little bit off of all the Manchester coverage that we've been talking about, the attack. Obviously, President Trump, we just heard from him moments ago. This is the first time he's really had to act as president while being on this trip, in terms of responding to something, a suspected terror attack of this magnitude. How do you think he's handled it?
Yeah, these tragedies really do change everything, and it's hard kind of and there's almost, as there is a fog of war, there's kind of a fog of diplomacy just in terms of what we do and don't know and everything else. But certainly when we look at attacks that happen here, there's what's called a rally around the flag effect, that people do look to the president as the commander-in-chief, as the kind of chief diplomat, as a as a rallying point. When they happen abroad, it's less clear as to whether there are strong effects. But I think certainly there is a moment here for people to come together, for some of the partisan rhetoric to subside a bit as we just think about just these heinous acts and the human cost and everything else.
And obviously a big part of that too is because it's such a strong ally of the United States.
Yes, definitely.
As it pertains to Washington, you mentioned toning down some of the bipartisanship that's been going on. What do you think this does in terms of a day at the on Capitol Hill today? Does it change much, especially with the budget being on the docket today?
Yeah, that's a great question. I haven't heard yet that they're planning on moving anything, so there will be some business as usual. Although I'm sure at any moment they may be ready to try to learn the latest from British intelligence about what this attack was and who was behind it and whether or not any of our cities or citizens are in danger. But more than likely, they will continue to move forward just because there are so many big questions at hand to deal with.
There certainly are. Obviously, there's a lot of talk about the increase in military spending, but also a lot of cuts in this budget, and it's over the course of 10 years. What kind of stands out to you about what we've heard so far about the budget that's going to be presented?
Sure. So one thing you may remember is some of these points sounded really familiar because they did come out months ago as we were just passing kind of a budget to push on through the next year. So some of these provisions weren't terribly surprising, and most people consider the president's budget, it's both a wish list and kind of a message about their priorities, but once Congress gets in there, it does change quite a bit in terms of what comes out. But I've heard it simplified down to protects veterans, protects older citizens. It doesn't really touch entitlements like Social Security or Medicare, but younger Americans, poorer Americans are going to find parts of this budget that they're going to push against and campaign against as it gets managed in Congress.
One of the things lost in the shuffle of all this too is the ongoing investigation into Russian meddling in the election, and there was a big story that came out yesterday with General Flynn pleading the Fifth, which has now been obviously kind of talked about a little bit less given what's happened overseas.
Sure.
But what do you think the magnitude of him pleading the Fifth is in terms of where we go moving forward in terms of this investigation?
Yes, I think by having Robert Mueller kind of running a major investigation, special investigation on the side, it makes it a bit difficult to know to what extent Congress not being able to get something really matters now. So one thing we're going to see is that this will just be kind of a constant churn as it's both happening sometimes it's going to be playing out in congressional committees. Other times we're going to hear things from the special investigators, what they're finding. And then also the press is just going to keep pushing. So much of what we've been reading is the Washington Post and the New York Times just kind of one after another hitting on this. So it's going to be just a constant sound that we're going to be dealing with.
A lot going on in Washington, D.C. as well as abroad this morning. Dr. Lee Hanna, Wright State University, thanks so much for your time this morning.
Thanks for having me.